Welcome to the deep dive. And before we even get started today, do us a huge favor. Take a second right now to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive.
Absolutely.
Because today we have a massive, just incredibly provocative piece of source material in front of us. We are doing a comprehensive cover-to-cover review of a highly controversial new ebook titled Amoral Traitors: Gold Digging, Monkey Branching, and War Brides by Conrad Riker.
Right.
And if you want to read the full unfiltered text for yourself, and honestly, after hearing the scope of what we're about to cover, you need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book.
Yeah, you'll definitely want the source material for this one.
Exactly. Also, make sure you follow the author directly at his Substack. That's at Conrad and Riker, just so you can see where these theories are developing in real time.
Because it is an exhaustive text. I mean, the sheer volume of sociological, legal, and evolutionary data the author attempts to synthesize, it's generating a massive amount of conversation right now.
Oh, it's everywhere.
It really touches on the very foundation of how our modern world operates.
It does. And because of the sheer depth of this material, we need to frame the mission of this deep dive right up front, specifically for you, the listener.
Right.
We know our audience for this particular deep dive includes men's rights activists and red-pilled men who are actively seeking to understand the history, the mechanics, and the underlying architecture of modern institutions.
The foundational blueprints.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You aren't just looking for surface-level talking points.
Yeah.
You want to understand how these systems operated before they underwent what the author describes as total ideological capture.
Which is the core thesis.
Right. So the goal today is to meticulously unpack Riker's central argument, that our institutions, from the family court to the corporate boardroom to the halls of government, have been entirely captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
And it's an ideological shift that he claims has fundamentally and perhaps permanently altered the social contract between men and women.
But, and this is crucial, before we dive into the granular data, we absolutely must issue a mandatory impartiality disclaimer.
We have to. The source material we're covering today contains highly politically charged content.
Very much so.
So we want to make it unequivocally clear to you, the listener, that neither of us are taking sides. We are not endorsing these viewpoints or validating the specific claims, statistics, or conclusions made in the book.
Not at all.
Our role today is strictly to act as impartial guides. We are here to meticulously report on and analytically unpack the ideas, the data points, and the arguments contained in Riker's original source material.
Yeah, the objective is simply to ensure that you fully understand the author's perspective and the mechanics of his overarching theory.
We are just mapping the territory that the book has laid down.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, because Riker, he does not ease the reader in.
No, he really doesn't.
He starts by going straight for the jugular of modern marriage, completely deconstructing the traditional understanding of the institution. He argues that marriage is no longer a covenant. It's been stripped of its sacred lifelong bond. Instead, the text redefines modern marriage as a conditional contract based on emotional utility.
And a contract that he argues is now structurally and legally rigged against men.
Right. So to build this case, the text relies on a very specific reading of demographic trends and divorce statistics.
Yeah, the data he pulls is pretty intense. The book points to data claiming that up to 90% of divorces are currently initiated by women.
90%.
Yeah, but what the author focuses on isn't just the sheer number, it's the timing of these filings.
The timing.
The argument presented is that these are not random separations based on a gradual drifting apart over years. Instead, the book points out a pattern where these filings are specifically and strategically timed with a man's financial or professional hardship.
And he has a specific term for this, right?
Yes. Reichel terms this the abandonment tax.
The abandonment tax. Wow.
The underlying premise here is that when the male provider stumbles, whether through a layoff, a business failure, or just a general economic downturn, the maternal survival switch flips in the female psyche.
So it's evolutionary response.
According to the text, yes. In that moment, the man transforms from a vessel of security into a liability, and that triggers an immediate exit.
But let me stop you there, because that assumes a level of calculation that really goes against the standard cultural narrative of, we just fell out of love.
Right, the typical amicable split narrative.
Yeah. Does the book provide a framework for how that exit actually happens in practice? Because it rarely looks like someone just packing a bag the exact day a guy loses his job.
The book absolutely provides a framework, and it leans heavily on a concept coined by divorce coach Lori Gottlieb, which is called monkey branching.
Monkey branching.
Yeah, it's the idea that a person does not let go of their current branch, meaning their current relationship, until they have a firm grasp on the next one.
So they never actually experience a free fall.
Exactly. And according to the data presented in the text, 61% of female-initiated divorces involve a new partner who is already in the picture before the paperwork is even filed.
61%.
That's the number he cites. The text frames this not as a tragic breakdown in marital communication, but as a calculated, premeditated exit strategy optimized for resource continuity.
And he pairs that physical transition with a psychological one, which he calls the Tinder widow phenomenon.
Right.
The book argues that women emotionally disengage long before the actual physical split happens. And they do this by comparing their current real-world partners to entirely fictionalized ideals.
The top 0.1% of men.
Exactly. We are talking about billionaires, elite athletes, celebrities. They are swiping on dating apps or scrolling through highly curated social media feeds.
And the text suggests they aren't necessarily doing this to cheat physically in that exact moment.
No, they are doing it to create psychological distance from their husband. The baseline for comparison, the book says, becomes completely detached from reality.
A completely warped baseline.
Right. A man working a 50-hour week to pay the mortgage is suddenly being subconsciously judged against a tech billionaire's lifestyle on Instagram.
Which perfectly sets up the text's exploration of what it calls the war bride syndrome.
Right, the evolutionary psychology angle.
Exactly. This is where the author brings in the work of researchers like David Buss. The book highlights evolutionary data suggesting that 82% of women would theoretically walk away from a stable relationship if presented with a man of significantly greater status and resources.
82%.
Yes. Riker argues that hypergamy, that instinct to marry up, is not a social construct. He claims it is a hardwired biological imperative that completely overrides concepts of loyalty or honor when the opportunity arises.
And the high-profile examples he gives to illustrate this are fascinating because they're just so visible. He points to Mackenzie Scott's $38 billion divorce from Jeff Bezos.
That's a key case study in the book.
The text notes that she secured the massive payout, right, and then very shortly after married a private school science teacher.
Right.
And then divorced him to attach herself to a hedge fund manager right as Amazon stock was surging.
Yeah.
Riker points out how the media universally praised her for following her heart and finding her truth.
While the text interprets it as a masterclass in hypergamous resource extraction.
Exactly. He also brings up Grimes distancing herself from Elon Musk right during the incredibly stressful, high-stakes period of the Twitter acquisition.
Another instance of the abandonment tax.
Yeah. The argument the book is making is that female loyalty is intrinsically tied to a man's status and security. When that status is threatened, or when a vastly superior option presents itself, they exit.
What's fascinating here is how the author connects this raw evolutionary psychology to the highly sanitized bureaucratic environment of the modern legal system.
The family court.
Yes. The book describes the family court system not as an impartial venue for adjudicating justice, but as a cartel.
A cartel. That is a heavy word choice.
It is deliberate. The text points to demographic data showing that 82% of family court judges and 76% of divorce lawyers are now female.
That is a massive demographic monopoly.
And in the author's view, this near total monopoly means the system no longer operates on objective legal principles. Instead, it operates on what the text calls maternal licensing.
Maternal licensing. So, break down exactly how the book defines that term. It sounds like it means mothers are treated as fundamentally sacred by the court.
Yes, while fathers are treated as disposable utilities.
Okay, unpack the mechanics of that.
Well, the text argues that the legal system has internalized a biological bias. To support this, the book points to a 2022 Journal of Family Law study.
What did the study find?
The author claims it confirms a startling trend. Women who contribute absolutely no financial labor to a household, no income, no capital investment, are still winning 74% of the equity in divorce settlements.
74% equity for zero financial contribution.
Right. And the mechanism allowing this, according to the text, is that the courts have gradually begun recognizing abstract concepts like emotional labor as a tangible form of capital.
So feelings become actual literal currency.
Exactly. Treated as equivalent to or even superseding actual financial contribution.
The anecdotes provided in the text to illustrate this shift are just wild. I mean, if you're listening to this, you're probably wondering how an abstract concept like emotional labor actually gets monetized in a real-world courtroom,
It sounds absurd until you see the case law.
right? Well, the book details the case of a Silicon Valley CEO who ended up having to write a $128 million check to his ex-wife.
And her legal claim there was emotional neglect.
Yes, despite the fact that she had a massive allowance, fully funded trusts, and household staff. But here is the kicker. There was an ironclad prenup in place,
An ironclad prenup.
and the judge threw it out. Why? Because, according to the text, the wife literally cried during the mediation process.
What?
The author argues that the legal threshold to invalidate a contract wasn't fraud, it wasn't hidden assets, and it wasn't coercion. It was simply the presence of female tears.
The book reinforces this with another high-profile example, which is Kevin Costner's $80 million settlement in the 1990s.
Oh, yeah.
The text points out that Costner's wife didn't claim infidelity, there was no claim of physical abuse. Her lawsuit was based on emotional abandonment, specifically because Costner was working long hours, building his career, and becoming incredibly successful.
So his success was framed as a detriment to her.
Precisely. The book's interpretation of this case is that in the modern family court cartel, male effort and ambition are essentially viewed as a betrayal of the emotional contract.
The more you provide, the more you're penalized.
The more a man builds, the more he supposedly owes for being absent while building it. The text mentions another case in California where a woman won 60% of her husband's highly lucrative stock portfolio.
Simply by successfully arguing to a judge that her emotional support was the invisible engine that justified the payout.
Right.
But wait, how does a judge legally justify taking 60% of a stock portfolio based on a feeling? Is there a specific legal doctrine the book points to that allows this kind of redistribution?
Yes, there is. The text zeroes in on the modern application of the dissipation of assets doctrine.
Dissipation of assets. Okay.
Historically, this doctrine was meant to stop a spouse from maliciously draining bank accounts or hiding money in offshore accounts right before a divorce.
Like blowing it all at a casino.
Exactly. But the book argues it has been weaponized into a tool of lifestyle policing. The text highlights a specific anecdote where a man was ordered by the family court to repay $42,000 back into the marital estate.
Because he had taken martial arts classes over the course of the marriage.
Yes. The court deemed this an unnecessary expenditure that wasn't marriage enhancing.
But the text notes that his ex-wife spent $80,000 on crystal healing retreats and aura cleansings during that same period.
And the court ruled that her spending was completely acceptable as emotional self-care.
Unbelievable.
The book uses this specific contrast to argue that the legal system has abandoned objective financial accounting entirely.
Right.
The text posits that men are losing 92% of custody battles and the lion's share of their assets, not because they are inherently bad fathers or financial abusers,
But because the entire legal framework defaults to female emotional logic.
Exactly. What brings her comfort is legally protected. What brings him resilience is legally penalized.
Which naturally transitions into the core of the book's second major argument.
Right.
We're moving from the family court to the government itself.
A massive jump in scale.
Huge. The author proposes a massive overarching thesis here. That modern leftism is not actually a political ideology, an economic theory, or a philosophy of governance.
Right.
Instead, the text defines modern leftism as a female psychological condition.
That is a profound claim.
The argument is that as women have fewer children in the modern era, their powerful hardwired maternal instinct doesn't just disappear, it gets repressed, and then it gets projected entirely onto the state.
And the book describes this as the total infantilization of society. The government is essentially rebranded.
From what to what?
It goes from being an entity designed to defend borders, uphold contracts, and enforce objective laws into what the author derisively calls a 24/7 wet nurse.
A 24/7 wet nurse.
To explain the mechanics of this shift, the text introduces a concept called the care cascade and links it directly to what the author terms moral infantilism.
Moral infantilism. Okay, let's unpack the psychology behind that, because the book leans on some very specific academic frameworks to make this point.
It does. The text heavily references the developmental psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg and his stages of moral development.
Right.
For context, Kohlberg's framework suggests that human moral reasoning develops through 6 distinct stages. Stage 1 is basic obedience to avoid punishment. Stage 2 is self-interest, basically what's in it for me.
And then it scales up.
Yes. Stage 4 is about maintaining social order and objective law, while stages 5 and 6 involve abstract principles like the social contract and universal justice.
But the book focuses intensely on stage 3.
Extremely heavily on stage 3, which is the good boy, good girl orientation.
Okay.
At stage 3, morality is determined entirely by what pleases others, what maintains harmony, and what is approved by the immediate social group.
So the argument the book makes is that men, on average, push through into stages 4, 5, and 6. They prioritize objective law, merit, and universal principles, even if it upsets people.
Right.
But the text claims that women, on average, plateau at stage 3, meaning they prioritize emotional comfort, conflict avoidance, and social approval over objective principled justice.
Exactly. If a policy feels caring, it must be morally right, regardless of the actual downstream economic or social consequences.
That is the exact theoretical framework the author builds. And the book provides specific macro-level data points to argue that this psychological plateau is now driving modern institutional policy.
Let's look at those numbers.
The text notes that 73% of U.S. progressive think tank leaders are now women. It points to nations like Iceland, which boasts a 48% female parliament.
And what happened in Iceland?
Well, according to the data presented in the book, this achievement of gender parity directly correlated with a 12% drop in GDP per capita and a massive 37% explosion in social welfare spending.
A direct correlation.
The author also targets the European Union Parliament. He notes that if you analyze their output, the vast majority of their recent resolutions focus heavily on victimhood narratives, linguistic policing, and identity validation.
Rather than hard infrastructure, energy independence, or border defense.
Exactly. It's what the book calls policy as an emotional reflex. And the examples given are striking.
Like the situation in Belgium.
Yes, the text discusses a law passed in Belgium that grants paid leave, specifically for menstruation. The book frames this not as a triumph of progressive labor policy, but as a state-sanctioned temper tantrum
Because biology is being weaponized.
to extract taxpayer-funded comfort. The text points out that men experience severe hormonal fluctuations too, massive testosterone spikes that can cause physical and emotional distress. But men do not get state-subsidized sick days to manage their biology.
The author extends this critique deeply into the Swedish model as well. Sweden is often held up as the pinnacle of progressive governance, right?
Oh, constantly.
But the book is highly critical of it, viewing it as the ultimate manifestation of the maternal state. The text discusses Sweden's push for gender-neutral preschools.
Okay, how does that fit in?
He argues that these environments actively pathologize normal boyhood energy. They treat rough-and-tumble play as a behavioral disorder to be managed rather than a natural developmental stage.
So suppressing male nature from childhood.
Yes. The book also details the systemic replacement of biological fathers with state-appointed gender coaches.
Gender coaches, wow.
Furthermore, the text points to specific interpretations of Swedish law where, the author claims, if a man defends himself against a female attacker, the system is designed to criminalize his self-defense,
Meaning he becomes the abuser by default.
automatically labeling the man as the abuser simply because he possesses a physical advantage, completely ignoring who actually initiated the violence.
If you're listening to this, you might be wondering how a high-level theory about Kohlberg's moral stages actually impacts daily governance in your own city. Like, how does moral infantilism manifest in real life?
The book has a great analogy for this.
Yeah, imagine your house is on fire, and instead of grabbing a hose, the fire department holds a committee meeting to debate whether the color of the fire truck is historically problematic.
That is essentially the analogy the book uses when pointing to the San Francisco School Board.
The text details how, during a period of massive crisis, with student dropouts skyrocketing and campus violence spiking, an all-female school board spent months prioritizing the renaming of schools.
Well, the actual academic system was falling apart.
Yes. They spent endless hours debating taking the name of Abraham Lincoln off a high school because his historical record was deemed emotionally harmful to certain groups.
The book uses this to illustrate the core danger of symbolism over substance.
Right. The maternal state, according to the text, is fundamentally incapable of solving hard, objective problems. It just endlessly rearranges the emotional furniture to ensure everyone feels validated while the structure burns down.
This systemic reliance on emotion and the prioritizing of feelings over facts brings us directly to the text's third section, which explores what the author provocatively calls the tier tribunal.
The tier tribunal.
This is where the book makes a highly controversial biological claim regarding the weaponization of emotion in the workplace and the justice system.
The tiers themselves.
Yes, the text posits that female tears are not merely an expression of sadness, but an evolutionary biological weapon used to bypass male logic, secure immediate compliance, and ultimately destroy male autonomy.
The biology presented here is fascinating, regardless of how you interpret it. The book claims that female tears physically contain a hormone called prolactin.
Prolactin, right.
And according to the evolutionary data cited in the text, when men are exposed to the pheromones in these tears, their neurological reasoning centers are actively disabled by up to 40%.
40%.
The text argues this evolved so that early human males wouldn't abandon crying infants, triggering an immediate submissive caregiving response in the male brain.
And the book's central argument is that this hardwired biological reality, which evolved for child rearing, is now being actively and intentionally weaponized in modern corporate and institutional environments.
So they're hacking the male brain.
Essentially, yes. To back this up, the text cites a 2023 Fortune 500 HR report.
And what did that reveal?
78% of male managers anonymously admitted to actively altering performance reviews, inflating scores, and avoiding necessary critical feedback simply to avoid dealing with a female employee crying in their office.
Let's just stop and think about the profound implications of that one single statistic for a moment. If that Fortune 500 report is accurate, it means the entire concept of meritocracy in the corporate world is a total illusion.
A facade.
It means performance metrics, promotions, and corporate hierarchy are being quietly rewritten not by actual competence, output, or excellence, but entirely by conflict avoidance.
The text literally calls it chemical warfare in the boardroom.
Chemical warfare.
Men's logical brains just shut down, they stop reasoning, and they submit to the emotional demand.
But the book makes clear that it's not just tears. The author breaks down female social behavior into a specific framework he calls the GSR triad: gossip, shame, and rally.
And he describes this dynamic as hormonal tribalism.
To support the existence of this triad, the text points to a Harvard sociological study finding that women, on average, spend 58 minutes a day gossiping. And remarkably, 72% of that gossip is strictly negative or exclusionary in nature.
The book pairs this with research from UC Davis focusing on female indirect aggression. The author posits a fundamental difference in conflict resolution. While men typically confront obstacles or rivals directly, which allows for immediate resolution, women tend to destroy reputations covertly.
Behind the scenes.
They operate through whisper networks, social ostracization, and leveraging HR complaints to eliminate threats to their emotional equilibrium.
There's an anecdote the text shares that perfectly encapsulates this. The book details the case of a top-performing male tech employee who was fired.
Do you remember his official HR violation?
It was toxic positivity.
The toxic positivity.
His crime was essentially that his relentless excellence, high output, and aggressively positive attitude made his female coworkers feel inadequate and stressed.
So instead of competing with him,
the text claims they utilized the gossip shame rally triad. They gossiped to form a consensus of victimhood, shamed his work ethic as toxic, and rallied HR to terminate him.
The book uses this to demonstrate how excellence is actively punished in female-dominated environments if it disrupts the collective emotional comfort of the group.
This dynamic, where subjective emotional discomfort is treated as actionable harm, has led to what the book calls a complete inversion of the justice system.
The institutional default.
Yes, the default to believe all women. According to a comprehensive report from FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, this ideological mindset has resulted in an 89% lack of due process for men in college Title IX tribunals.
89%.
We are talking about tribunals where men are denied the right to cross-examine their accusers or present exculpatory evidence.
The book pairs this terrifying lack of due process with data suggesting a 37% false accusation rate in family courts during custody disputes.
Because the system incentivizes women to make allegations, the mere accusation guarantees them leverage.
The book even brings up the infamous 1991 Sandy Stone case. This was a case where a woman's defense team actually used PMS, premenstrual syndrome, as a legitimate legal defense for murder.
Defending murder with biology.
Arguing she wasn't fully in control of her actions due to her hormones. The author's point in bringing this up is to show a systemic pattern. Biology is constantly used by women to evade moral agency.
So they want it both ways.
The text argues that when women demand access to power, corporate boards, or combat roles, they claim to be fiercely independent and identical to men.
But the moment they commit violence, fail a standard, or face a consequence, they immediately retreat into biology, blaming their hormones, their emotional fragility, or systemic patriarchy to escape accountability.
If we connect this evasion of accountability to the bigger picture, it leads us directly into the darkest, most visceral claims in the book, found in Section 4.
This is where it gets incredibly heavy.
This section moves past the boardroom and the courtroom and deals with raw reproductive leverage. The text deeply explores the mechanics of paternity fraud and provides a highly controversial framing of the global abortion debate.
If the justice system and the boardroom have been entirely reshaped by these emotional dynamics, it absolutely makes you wonder how deep this goes into the actual family unit.
Right down to the biology of reproduction.
Yeah, the statistics the author drops on paternity fraud are staggering. You hear these numbers, and it's genuinely hard to process.
They are very high.
The text reports that non-paternity rates, meaning a man unknowingly raising and funding a child that biologically is not his, currently sit between 10% and 30% in Western countries, depending on the demographics sampled.
That is up to nearly 1 in 3 men in some demographics.
The book cites a 2021 Australia study that is particularly damning. It found that women lied in 93% of paternity disputes when directly asked under oath if a specific man was the biological father.
To highlight the systemic response to this massive scale of fraud, the book shares a devastating legal anecdote.
The child support case.
Right. It details the case of a man who paid $87,000 in child support over several years for a child he eventually proved, via a DNA test, was not biologically his.
Now, logically, one would assume the court would recognize the fraud and order restitution.
But according to the text, the court completely refused to order repayment from the mother.
Not a dime.
Instead, the court relied on the legal principle of equitable estoppel, or the presumption of paternity, effectively punishing the man for missing subsequent payments after discovering the truth.
Because the emotional stability of the child was paramount?
Exactly. Completely overriding the objective truth of the DNA and utterly destroying the man's financial autonomy.
And from that destruction of male autonomy, the text tackles the ultimate taboo: abortion.
A highly polarized topic.
The book frames the estimated 1.2 billion global abortions that have occurred since 1980, not as a triumph of feminism, healthcare, or reproductive freedom,
No, the author categorizes this staggering number as an act of demographic warfare.
and the ultimate civilization-scale evasion of accountability.
The book delves into a phenomenon the author coins motherhood performance art.
Motherhood performance art.
The text points out a glaring societal contradiction. It contrasts the modern political movement of women demanding massive state subsidies, universal taxpayer-funded childcare, and extended paid leave under the banner of supporting mothers.
Right.
Yet, simultaneously, these same demographics are increasingly outsourcing the actual day-to-day labor of parenting to nannies, state-run daycares, and iPads.
So they want the title without the labor.
The author views this as a narcissistic, societal-level display, where the elevated moral status of motherhood is fiercely claimed and monetized, but the actual duty and sacrifice of raising the child is actively abandoned to the state.
Let's synthesize the overarching theme the book is building here.
Yeah.
The text makes the case that modern women demand absolute, unquestionable bodily autonomy when it comes to ending a pregnancy. Their body, their choice, zero interference.
Right.
But simultaneously, they entirely deny men any semblance of financial autonomy when it comes to child support, alimony, or family court asset division.
The book argues this isn't about equality at all. It creates a highly optimized legal system designed for maximum resource extraction for men, paired with absolutely zero accountability or consequence for women.
This systemic extraction and total lack of accountability, the book argues in Section 5, has led directly to the collapse of Western institutions and the dismantling of the Western canon itself.
The text meticulously unpacks how fields that have become overwhelmingly female-dominated, specifically early education, corporate human resources, and modern psychotherapy, have actively and purposefully dismantled meritocracy, objective logic, and historical truth.
Let's look closely at the education sector because the statistics paint a very clear picture of the environment our boys are being raised in.
The numbers are stark.
The book points out that 76% of American public school teachers are women. The result of this demographic monopoly, the text claims, is a classroom environment that fundamentally misunderstands and actively punishes male energy.
And boys are currently 400% more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD.
400%.
Yeah.
The author argues this isn't a medical epidemic, it is the pathologization of typical, active, competitive boy behavior by female teachers who desire a quiet, compliant, emotionally regulated classroom.
The author introduces a fascinating, albeit controversial, psychological term here to explain how this happens on an intellectual level. Feminist immune evasion, or FI.
FI.
The text defines FIE as a cognitive hijacking mechanism. It claims that the female mind will reflexively reject objective truth, empirical data, or historical fact if accepting that truth threatens their emotional comfort or their tribal ideological alliances.
The book provides incredibly alarming examples of this rejection of logic manifesting in elite academia.
Yeah, the examples the book pulls are wild. The text highlights a Columbia University PhD candidate who published a paper claiming that mathematics itself is inherently racist and patriarchal.
Because it strictly values objective truth and exact answers over lived experience.
Right. The book points to a UC Berkeley syllabus that labeled foundational Western thinkers, like Aristotle and Plato, strictly as oppressors whose logic must be discarded in favor of modern intersectional theory.
The text even brings up a Canadian teacher who went viral for stating on video that factually correct answers on a math test are actually wrong if the process of getting that answer hurts a marginalized student's feelings.
The author categorizes this systemic dismantling of objective reality as cultural infanticide.
Cultural infanticide.
It is the deliberate, state-sponsored replacement of classical, rigorous education with an environment optimized solely for emotional safety.
The book illustrates this with a shocking example of a public school district in Illinois. They literally removed their entire curriculum on Shakespeare, replacing it with a unit on hip-hop resistance.
The text argues this is a deliberate strategy to prioritize contemporary grievance and emotional validation over the foundational, intellectually rigorous literature of Western civilization.
And the book makes it clear that this rejection of reality doesn't stop at graduation. It follows men right into the workplace and the therapist's office.
The therapy industrial complex.
Yes. The text makes that 87% of modern therapists are women. The author claims this massive demographic skew means the entire industry now actively pathologizes male stoicism and resilience as toxic.
While simultaneously selling divorce and family destruction to women under the therapeutic guise of finding your truth and self-actualization.
And in the corporate world, the book describes HR departments not as administrative bodies, but as weaponized sororities.
The text argues that modern HR does not exist to optimize human capital, protect the company from liability, or reward excellence.
It exists solely to enforce ideological conformity and protect female emotional comfort.
The author brings up the famous case of the Google engineer, the James Day Moore parallel, who was instantly fired simply for circulating a memo that referenced peer-reviewed mainstream evolutionary biology regarding sex differences and career preferences.
To the author, this event proves definitively that in any female-dominated institutional space, objective scientific truth is completely subordinate to emotional compliance. So we have unpacked the author's sprawling theory of institutional capture. For you, the listener, the obvious question remains, what does this all mean?
Right.
If the system is this fundamentally rigged from the courtroom to the classroom to the boardroom, what is Riker's proposed solution?
That brings us to the final section of the book, Reclaiming Honor and the Future of Men Without Women.
The text does not offer a message of political hope.
Not at all. It outlines a very stark, radical path forward. The book states that the only viable solution for men is to walk away from the rigged system entirely and begin rebuilding parallel, truth-based structures from scratch.
The author observes and documents a massive, rising trend of male disengagement and intentional separatism.
Men opting out.
According to the text, men are actively waking up and opting out of the social contract. They are refusing marriage, they are avoiding fatherhood under the current highly punitive legal frameworks, and they are quietly quitting corporate structures to escape what the book calls emotional parasitism and HR policing.
The text highlights a fascinating real-world example of what this parallel structure actually looks like in practice. The Iron Citadel in Montana.
The Iron Citadel?
According to the book, this is a 500-acre, entirely male-only community founded by ex-tech workers and engineers who simply walked away.
It runs entirely on shared physical labor, absolute meritocracy, and strict personal accountability.
It is a space completely free of female HR oversight, emotional policing, or the constant looming threat of family court asset extraction.
But the text argues that physical separation isn't enough. There must be an intellectual separation as well. The book notes a massive cultural shift among men back toward ancient, rigorous philosophies, specifically highlighting the explosive revival of Stoicism.
The text points to the massive popularity of figures like Marcus Aurelius and vibrant online communities dedicated to Stoic philosophy.
The author pairs this with a necessary return to the trivium, the classical education model consisting of logic, rhetoric, and grammar.
The book sees these specific intellectual tools not just as self-improvement, but as a necessary cognitive defense system against the constant emotional blackmail of the maternal state.
The book even brings up Jordan Peterson's famous rule number 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back.
Right.
The text frames this not just as basic posture advice, but as a literal physical declaration of war against the societal pressure to shrink, apologize, and conform to female emotional demands.
The author points to the rapid rise of grassroots brotherhood organizations like the rigorous early morning workout group F3 and Debt of Honor programs.
The book describes these as vital, male-centric spaces that actively enforce accountability, demand truth-telling, and impose strict physical and social consequences, all without the covert gossiping or emotional shaming found in female-dominated spheres.
The author's ultimate, uncompromising conclusion is that male honor can only be reclaimed through deliberate separation and the strict, unapologetic enforcement of objective truth.
Operating entirely outside the boundaries of the institutions that have been irrevocably captured by what he sees as a destructive maternal ideology.
It is a profound shift in perspective.
Which leaves us with an incredibly provocative, heavy thought to mull over as we conclude this deep dive. If the book's core thesis is correct, if the fundamental architecture of our legal, educational, and corporate institutions is genuinely, hopelessly captured by an emotionally driven, reality-denying maternal state, then hoping for political reform is just a comforting myth.
Because you cannot vote your way out of evolutionary biology.
Exactly. Therefore, the ultimate question for men isn't about how to argue better in a rigged court or which political candidate to support in a captured system. The question the book leaves you with is whether true freedom now requires total civilizational secession.
Civilizational secession.
Does survival require men to walk away and build entirely new societies from the ground up out in the wilderness where the only acceptable currency is absolute unapologetic truth? It is a radical concept to walk away with, and one that demands serious reflection.
It absolutely does.
Before we wrap up, I want to remind you one last time to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing you these deep dives. And if you want to dive into the raw, unfiltered source material we just spent the last hour meticulously reviewing, you need to check Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks right now to buy Amoral Traitors.
Definitely get the book.
Also, make sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker at his Substack to join the ongoing conversation. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.